Hello, everybody. Uh, this will be our last new lecture and new slides for tonight that some of which might be on the final. Then we'll talk about how to study for the final, as we did before the midterm. And we'll still end quite early, probably before 9 o'clock, unless people want to take a break. But I think we agree, right? It's best to go forward without a break. Okay. All right. I'll get the gallery view so I'll see maybe a few of you. Some interesting photos. Okay. So I have just by this afternoon, I managed to get all of the second papers that were sent on time logged in. Let me admit Tay here. Okay. So that means that if you turned your paper in on time, most people I was able to actually send you directly from the file if your email was stored. I think you understand what I'm saying. And most people's emails by now I do have stored in my AOL email files, but not everybody's. Okay. Well, somehow that didn't get him in here. All right. Hope you don't see Tay here. I'm trying to let him in. He may have to try 3 times. Uh, hmm. Anyway, so what I'm saying is you should have gotten an email. Some of you haven't checked. As of 5:30 or so today, I finished sending all the ones that I had received the grades from my readers. I check them always. Okay. I'm going to try C waiting room because it's not, why it's not letting him in. Message. This is strange. Oh well, we'll just wait and see if he tries again. Okay, what we have is less than a week, or barely 1 week from tonight, or all the deadline. Of course, it's the night of the exam, the 16th. It's going to be going to talk about it in detail after we finish the last new slides. But just as a advance notice of, or reminder, I should say. The test is the same exact format, same number of slides, same grading and point value, 100 points total, just like the midterm. And it isn't cumulative. I've said that many times, but a lot of people forget that. So you don't have to go back and study anything that you studied before the midterm, just everything since then. And of course, all of those lectures are going to be posted, including tonight's, which will be, I'm going to say, by 6 on Saturday. Let's see. Okay, now, let's see. Oh, good. Now it's saying admit all. Okay, hopefully. Why is it just sitting there? Okay, hopefully we've got the other people in now. All right, let me just. All right, so we should be able to finish, well, that is, you as students should be able to finish the exam in real time, but you have, just like with the midterm, there's something wrong here. I don't get what's going on. I've admit him 3 times now, so sorry about the interruptions, but I do want all the students who are trying to attend to be able to. Hey, good, welcome. Okay, just took 3 tries. All right, so what I'm saying is you have a very short window for any extra credit. Now, most people did well enough on their 2 papers, and not quite as many, but still the vast majority did well enough on your midterm that you're already headed for an A. You could always email me and ask me, at any time between now and the end of finals exam week, which is next Saturday, which is the, let's see, 16th, 19th. That's the deadline for turning in any late work. No, I misspoke. Late papers have to be turned in before it's in the syllabus, before the final. I can't start grading more papers. Once the finals are done, I have to focus on that and extra credit. I will accept extra credit. So deadline for extra credit, hang on, let me, and for the final, your final version of the final exam. That deadline is going to be 6 p.m. on Saturday. You're going to hear me say that again tonight. You're going to see emails, 2 at least, from me to remind you, and I'll say it again on the night of the test. 1 week from tonight, the test will be 1 hour. Some of you will finish in that amount of time, but of course, most people want to take time to double check their answers since you have that option. It's obviously an open book test. And or you can, if you missed it or otherwise aren't sure if you got everything right, you can go back and look at the video of the test. It'll be posted on YouTube, as all my other lectures are, for 48 hours. That's plenty of time for people from Thursday at 6 or by 6 p.m. till Saturday at 6. So if you send me a copy of your test on Sunday, sorry, I have to stick to certain deadlines. I think I'm pretty reasonably lenient. I've been told that by other teachers as well as some students when it comes to accepting late work. But there has to be a cutoff because we, all of us teachers, have to get the grades in before Christmas. And you would want your grades in your cubby, right? The student cubbies on time. So if we don't do that, then the college can't process the grades and send them to you by the first, I think it's the first Monday of January, whatever that day is, the first, work day after New Year's. Okay, so with all that in mind, what I'm really saying is you've got 1 week from tonight to give me, if you didn't turn in either of your 2 papers, I would ahead and counted the papers I got that were turned in for people who, some people hadn't turned in any, but where they just turned their first one in this week or when it was due, I'm sorry. The second, I counted it as the second paper. Obviously that's a benefit to you because then it's no points off. So you only have 10 points off for the first paper, even if you get it in the day before the final, but that's your cutoff. Once I've finished giving the final, I'm not going to accept any late papers. I hope everyone's clear. I'm just trying to give you a heads up. Okay, so extra credit options, I'm going to remind you they're on your original handout, and I will send it to anyone who asks because I've been repeating it so many times. I don't want to eat up a lot of class time with this for people who already have heard or don't want or need extra credit. But a lot of people could use it. There are plenty of people on the cusp between an A and a B or a B and a C with the grades they've gotten now, 3 grades, right? That I've now entered, 2 papers and a midterm. So depending on how you do on the final, you could easily benefit from up to 50 points extra credit. Nobody's come close to that. I think 1 or 2 people have half that. So if you're in that category, you should know because I've told people that by email when I responded to them or forwarded the second paper. Then I will include a link as a courtesy to you without you having to ask for it to the original course grading and policy handout. Remember, we went over it in class the first night, and some of you probably still don't have it, or I don't know, maybe don't know where to find it. It's an attachment, a PDF, so you can open it and you can see what all the extra credit options are right there. I don't have to keep repeating it. So I will send that to anyone who might benefit from extra credit. Okay, for now, I think we are best to move forward with the lecture, but are there any questions at this point before we start tonight's last new topic about whatever I just said, extra credit or late papers or grades in general? Anybody? Okay, because yes, please go.
Will you confirm with us that you got our extra credit?
Oh yes. Oh yes, absolutely. I imagine you're asking because I've a few people in both classes have sent me extra credit that I had to. It's there. I just saw it, but I had to focus on getting the second paper graded first.
No problem.
So you will get a confirmation by this weekend if you've sent in extra credit before, say, by Saturday. Certainly you'll get that confirmation before Monday morning, probably sooner, like Friday. And I'll go in order of when I receive the extra credit. They're all sitting there. I didn't delete anything. And even, I think some of you know this, almost every website I've ever seen, and certainly AOL has a fail-safe in case you accidentally do delete something. It's stored in recently deleted. I haven't done that in a long time. So if you sent me, if you're one of those people asking or anybody else is wondering, extra credit, you didn't hear back from me yet, just because I had to focus first on the papers. I want to get them done so everyone who turned them in on time will know their grade heading into the final, okay? And then I will get to, in order of received or receipt, of your extra credit, you will get a confirmation about how many points you got. Yeah, I see there's several people that did that. So yes, and anybody who sends an extra credit in between now and the end of finals week, I'll also confirm all of those. Okay. Yeah, this is a good time for any general questions like that. Anybody else have any other questions about grading, extra credit, or late papers? Okay, because we're going to cover the final in the last half hour or so here. Okay, so let's now do speaker view and get started with tonight's lecture. That's a very interesting. What do you mind my asking? Let's go, Joe. I know what that's about, but what is that about? Oh, it's a moose, a giant moose above the heads of two. It looks like JC students. I don't know. That's an interesting image. I don't know where. Now,
It's
where
in
is that
Montana.
moose? Is that moose in Santa Rosa somewhere in a park? It's a statue, obviously.
No, it was taken in Montana.
Oh, oh, so it's a statue in maybe or near a national park where there are moose.
Yeah, near a national park. And, we were masking up like we were supposed to be
Yeah,
there.
I see that. Well, that's a beautiful
Although
state.
not everyone did.
What park? Or we're near what park?
Glacial.
Oh yeah,
Glacial
it's
National Park.
beautiful. Well, the whole state is, scenic. Yeah, and then also the moose are, I think I'm saying it correctly, some of the most incredibly impressive animals in person, aren't they? And also potentially dangerous. I know, because when I was
Yeah,
in my 20s,
yeah.
my wife and I were driving through Montana, and we got out, and I think it was actually Grand Teton. No, it wouldn't be Tetons. Oh no, it was Yosemite. Yeah, Yellowstone. Pardon me, I said it wrong. Yellowstone,
Yellowstone.
which is
That's where we're at.
part of it's in Montana, right? So I got out of my car to take photos of a moose. The moose made it clear by shaking its head and pawing the ground. It didn't want me to take the photo. I went ahead and took 3 or 4, and then it turned and started charging me. I barely got back into my car.
I
So
was
be
actually
careful.
I was up there for a few months at the beginning of the pandemic with my daughter, and I didn't see one moose.
Oh, I see.
Only a statue, because they're really shy. I think they don't come out a lot. They
Yeah,
like to
well,
hide in the
it
trees.
might be the ones in Yellowstone are different. I heard that from the rangers because they're more used to people. Because of course, it's one of the most highly attended. Well, it used to be, not now, but it will be again. Like of course, Yellowstone and Yosemite both. I think they're the two most highly
I hope it will be again.
Oh, they will. We got some help coming on the way, and I think by this time next year, we'll look back and say, how did we survive that? My daughter's already talking about what she's going to tell her kids when they start acting up. Hey, you don't know what hardship is. I lived through the pandemic of 2020. Shut up and do your duty. Okay, so let me try and yes, there we go. Let's get to tonight's topic. Sorry for the aside, but I think it was relevant. Anyway, photography is itself an art form, and that's an interesting photo. And of course, that's another thing you can do. You can say, and not just a snapshot of you and your friends in front of a pub or something or whatever, a bar. But if it has some kind of like that one, object of creative artistic skill, yours or someone else's, if that object is an actual original work of art and not some mass-produced thing, it'll be obvious, I think. You could write what it is below, where you took it, your name and the class, and I would give you 5 points. You're going to do that once, though, because that's kind of an easy gimme. So that's one other extra credit option. It's sort of a tangent off of the one where you send in your own artwork. That you can do up to, I think I said 4 times for 20 points. All right, here we go. Tonight's topic is late medieval art. Now we're not going to look at architecture. We've covered Gothic or late medieval, well, late Gothic and early Gothic, right? The whole last part of the medieval era was in architecture was the period of Gothic style. We covered that for the last 2 weeks. So now we are going to look at painting. And there wasn't really much painting happening in earlier medieval times, except 2 ways. The illustrated manuscripts, they're called illuminated. We covered that, remember, a few weeks ago with early medieval art, usually Bibles that monks in a monastery created by hand. And in a way, it's more almost like drawing, but they use certain kinds of, dyes and colors that qualify, I guess, as the kind of painting. The other, of course, was fresco painting. That never disappeared. There was fresco painting in the early Middle Ages. We've lost most of it, but the Romans, we saw, left us plenty of examples of frescoes, as did the Egyptians and the Greeks and other ancient cultures. And then frescoes were really big in the Renaissance, which we aren't going to cover, of course. We're going to end right as about the point where the Renaissance began in Italy, is where we leave off in this class. Now, I'm teaching next semester. If enough students sign up, we're having some low enrollments. I just took a look at the I don't know if anyone cares to comment, but I'm guessing it's a distraction of everything from finals coming up to the, of course, the pandemic, the holiday season, and, COVID fever, whatever, pandemic fever. But the enrollment is not as high in each of the sections, not just mine. If it was just mine, I think, well, maybe something about something I've said or done, but it's true for at least now. The only exceptions are the big lecture classes, but I can tell you right now that they're good classes. They're taught by a really great teacher. She used to be our department chair. She's from Egypt, Heidi Salah. Last full-time teacher hired in the art department. I applied for that job and they didn't even interview any adjuncts. That's the way it is, They hired from outside, but they made a good choice. She's excellent, and really was a good department chair. And the point is, she has a great class, but those two are nearly full. Her big lecture classes one is full and the other is approaching it. So that leaves the sections like mine and the other adjuncts who are teaching, at different times. The 6:30 now will be the start time, not 7. That's probably better for some people for my evening classes. So you just, keep in mind, if you want to take another art history class, if you feel like you've got the system down, because now you know how the grading's done in this class, what's expected, what's required for you to get an A, and so forth. But the topics are different. The classes I'm teaching are world art, ancient to medieval, and that covers a whole bunch of other topics, even though it overlaps a little bit with this one. Which would be the easy thing for you. If you took that class, of course, you would already know the material from Europe, right? Because we covered that. But the other culture is fascinating. Early history of China, of India, of Africa, of Arabic cultures, and or Mesoamerican cultures, pre-Columbian, it used to be called Mesoamerica, the Mayans. And I've been to these places. Well, not India. It's the one place I haven't, but the Asian cultures, Japan also. That's our 1.1. Then 1.2 is world art from the Renaissance to the 20th century. So if either subject interests you, take a look when you can catch your breath and sign up. Don't wait till the week before, because they'll cancel classes. They don't have enough people. Okay. All right. So now we're going to look at painting and one piece of sculpture, because there aren't a lot of slides that we have of late medieval or Gothic sculpture, but really this is an era that has its own definition or term, and it's our last new definition for tonight. And I will wait and give it to you when we have the first slide on the screen, okay? But let's just say that what we're looking at is a period from about 1200 to 1500. So that's the last few, 3 centuries of the Middle Ages, when there were cities by this time, definitely, and kingdoms, actual kingdoms, the forerunners of what we call nations today, of course, were forming, not everywhere in Europe, but France and England and Spain and Holland were already unified kingdoms, and they had their own, economy, government, and so forth, of course. And then the trade, of course, begins in the late, well, it's not obvious, in the early 1400s, long before Columbus didn't know where he was going. That was late 1400s. Way before that, almost a century before, the Portuguese and other European explorers were making voyages around Africa all the way to China and exploring other areas of the coasts of those continents, Africa and Asia. So the age of exploration was underway. And then we have the other factor is that the Islamic cultures began to expand their territory beyond North Africa and the Middle East into Europe. So there was obviously a clash, a conflict, wars between European kingdoms in Central and Eastern Europe and Turkey. The Turkish had this huge empire. So it's a pretty intense time. And then last but not least, there was this incredible amount of we think we're going, and we are, through a hard time. One of my readers said it's dark times, isn't it? That's a good way to put it. But this, I think, will be a year from now. Well, not a total memory, but behind us, the worst of it. The Black Death, you've heard of it? The bubonic plague. There was more than one or two mega plagues that killed as many as 1 out of every 3 people. We have a 3 to 4% mortality rate in most parts of the world, though in the US it's more like 2% from the COVID pandemic. Bad enough, but nothing like what they went through in the Middle Ages. So there was all this suffering. There were wars between these kingdoms. They had 100-year, you may have heard the phrase 100 Years' War. Shakespeare wrote about it in some of his plays. It was 100 years for his time, right? We're talking about 1400s. There were all kinds of huge bloody battles with thousands of people dying on both sides. And of course, the peasants got caught in the middle. Then there was the suffering of the peasants during droughts, famines, plagues, wars. So you're going to see the effect that had on their art to a certain extent tonight, because of the religious fervor. We talked about it last week, started to even get more intense during the late Gothic period. But like I said, there's another term for it. So let's do this. First, we're going to look at some slides that aren't on the syllabus, and you don't worry, I never will add slides out of the blue. I think I only ever did that once this semester, substituted one for another, but I'm not going to add to the list. So you don't have to take notes for the next 3, I think it's 3 slides, or 4, actually 4. I will tell you when we get to first must know, but pay attention, because it gives you some context, as well as the fact that I think at least some of you will find this interesting. These are things that you don't see very often, and they're not in Stockstead or any art history textbook I know. They're just from my own travels and reading, and being a history major in American history at UC Berkeley and at Cal State East Bay, where I got my master's in history. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at a painting at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. If you ever go to Washington, of course, everyone heads straight for the Smithsonian and maybe the Science and Aeronautics Museum, and that's it. They don't go to the other museums, but there's a National Portrait Gallery. That's interesting if you have any interest in American history. And then there's the National Gallery, which is an art museum that's one of the 3 or 4 best in this country. Some would say in this hemisphere. So that's what this is. It's a painting that I saw on the wall of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Why did I take this slide, and why am I showing it to you? Because look what we've got here. By now, you should start to recognize this if you've been following the last 2 weeks' lectures of Gothic architecture. These are Gothic groin vaults, right? And then we see the pointed arch windows here. The way the light is shining in this painting, probably from some kind of torches on the wall over here. You don't see through the glass, but they're probably stained glass. Certainly they're glass windows with the pointed arches, as is the doorway. And then here we have, several more, smaller ones set into a large one, perhaps a rose window at the top. I'm sure there would be one. Whoops, sorry. And then we have outside, of course, if you could see the exterior of this church, you'd see flying buttresses. Okay, so I'm showing it to you because it's a direct connection with American history. It's not in the US. This isn't a Gothic revival church. This is a painting done during the Renaissance of a church from the earlier medieval period. So it was already a few hundred years old when this painting was done. I think the painting was like 1600s or so. And it's called, nicknamed, this church, the nickname for it, I don't know the official name, the Pilgrim Church. That should get your curiosity going for those who have any interest in knowing why did they call this church in Holland, in what's now the country, the Netherlands officially, but most people call it Holland. What is that in any way connecting? How is it connecting? Well, the fact is the Pilgrims did not come from England. They were English. They were born there, but then they moved to Holland because of religious persecution. And they lived there for over 20 years. So many of their children were raised speaking Dutch and going to this church, which they hated. Not that they hated the people probably, or even the minister, because by this time these were Protestants, not Catholic anymore, but the church was built under Catholic bishop, I'm sure. And so the reason they didn't like it was too fancy. They thought it was too ornate, and all the services done there had too much, of the influence from other religions. and they couldn't, feel that they were teaching their children this dower, is it, or doer? I've seen that word, heard it pronounced both ways. Very dark vision. You know how they dressed. You've seen pictures, paintings, illustrations in history books, or even movies with pilgrim characters. They always dressed, it's true, in solid black. No ornament, no decoration, no color allowed, no dancing, no singing, no partying. It was a very strict, right, religious cult, some would call it, or sect is the right word. So they were unhappy, and they left from here, from Amsterdam, the biggest city in Holland. Well, they actually had to go to the coast to get a boat, but the point, that's where they were living for 20 years. So this is called the Bilgham Church because they attended it for up to 20 years, and it even has a historic plaque on it. But it's a Gothic style building, which they would never want to have in their own. And I'll show you what they did do when they get to New England here. Now, this is not New England, sorry. This is Virginia, the other early colony, right? The two first were Massachusetts in 1620, probably that's 400 years ago exactly, the Pilgrims, right? And by the way, some of you may know who the first American stand-up comic was. Well, actually, it was Mark Twain, but going back before that to mass media, meaning early radio, the first mass media was radio, of course. In the 1920s, his name was Will Rogers. He was half Native American, and he used to identify with that part of his heritage more so than his, he called it Yankee side. And he made a comment once about the celebration of Thanksgiving and New Plymouth, where the Pilgrims supposedly landed, and Plymouth Rock, which of course is fake. Nobody knows which rock they stepped on, but anyway, it's there. It's a monument in that town. He'd say, when it comes to Plymouth Rock, I can't help but think it would have been better if Plymouth Rock had landed on the Pilgrims rather than the other way around. Well, I'll leave you to interpret what that means. Anyway, that didn't earn him a lot of friends in some circles, but it got him a few people to laugh. So this is the other colony, Virginia, which is older. Virginia was founded by English about 13 years before Massachusetts. So in that colony, that's what we're looking at, is a church of Gothic authentic. Now, it's the only authentic Gothic style, or English Gothic style church in the United States, because we have plenty of replicas. They're called Gothic Revival. The Victorians were big on that. That was the main style the Victorians liked for churches. But those from the 1800s, that's not medieval. This is an authentic Gothic style church, not a revival, built by colonists in the early 1600s. It was finished and opened and has always been open since it opened in 1632. That's really early. There's nothing else like it in the United States. It's a National Historic Landmark. You see the Gothic pointed arch windows here, right? And then you might laugh at this, but look at the tall tower with the tapering spire. I mean, it's obviously not as tapering as the cathedrals in Europe, but it does reach a point, and then even has a finial. They have a piece of wood finial that had to be replaced, I'm sure, a few times. The whole roof probably has, but this is how it looked. We know because there were drawings and engravings of it all the way back to the 1600s. And then we have stained glass windows, right, which were added. The stained glass was added later because they didn't know in the 1600s. They knew how to make stained glass in England, but they didn't have the skill. The colonists who arrived off the boats in the early years didn't have that skill. So sometime in the 1800s, the stained glass windows were installed, but other than that, it's intact. Obviously, the roof has been replaced. Every other part, the walls, these buttresses, here we have clasping buttresses. It's not a big enough church to require flying buttresses, right? The kind that would stick out and go down to the ground. If it was much taller than this, like twice this height, it would probably need those. But then maybe the most amazing thing to me is the back window, which you'll see in just a minute, but I wanted to point this out. If you ever have seen pictures of streets in Amsterdam or canals, most of the canals are water. Well, obviously they have some roads. It's a city built on canals, or many other Dutch cities. You may have seen the houses. It's exactly what that is. It's a Dutch stepped gable. Why is that? These people didn't come from Holland like the Pilgrims did and lived there. They came directly from England, but they had skilled craftsmen with them who had been trained by the Dutch, because the Dutch were the best bricklayers in, well, some would say the world. So let's go see the back end of this, and then we'll get to tonight's slides. Well, that's my other view of it. There we go. This actually has a rose window. Small though it is, that is a round stained glass window. And here's your clasping buttresses. And this graveyard has the oldest English grave markers in the entire, I think in all of North America, or at least in what's now the United States. And you see how thick and massive these walls are. They've survived nearly 400 years. And look how large that's an amazing work of hand craftsmanship. I mean, these people were just, barely out of the starvation times, they call it the starving times, when of course, maybe later to their regret, the native tribes helped them survive through the winter, the first few winters. But by this time, they were still really struggling just on day-to-day survival. But somehow they found the time and the skill and the passion to construct this style of church that was the same as what they were making in England. So this is the only truly Gothic English style Gothic church in the U.S. And then the last one before we get to our first must-know, I'll show you, is a house from the time of the Salem witches trials. Now, some of you know about those. I'm not going to go into that. It's a bit of a tangent, but that's proof that the Middle Ages had somehow extended its dark, superstitious arm. That's an actual phrase from a history book I read back in college, over to North America. In other words, they still believed in witches, and as you may know, 20 innocent young women, actually 19 women and one man were hung for being witches. And in other villages in New England and other parts of the early English colonies, if someone was so-called proven convicted to be a witch, they sometimes were burned. That's medieval. There's no other word for that kind of behavior and a kind of ignorance and superstition. So this house was the house of a minister. He had nothing to do with the witch trials. It's not in the town of Salem where those occurred, but it's not far away. It's the real thing. There's not a replica, not a reconstruction. It's a 350-year-old house from 1680. And it's in a town called Topsfield. By the way, this house was featured in a movie called The Witches of Eastwick. I keep forgetting if that's the one with Michelle Pfeiffer. Anyway, pretty famous actresses, and maybe Meryl Streep. Anyways, it's about three modern women who, heritage goes back to the ancient, early witch trials. But this house actually was one of those that is called a medieval salt box. It's a style they were using in England all the way back, in other parts of Europe too, all the way back to the Middle Ages. 12, 13, 1400s, you walk through streets in old towns in Europe, particularly in England, you'll see houses just like this. And they were still making them in England at this time. So it is a late medieval house, even though by the time it was built in Europe, the Renaissance was underway, clearly. But it has these amazingly intact features, an overhang, which maybe a few of you know why that's there. Because back in the Middle Ages, in towns or big cities or small towns, wherever these kind of houses lined the street, they had no sewage system. They had no garbage collection. You just threw all your waste, human and otherwise, it's pretty nasty, out of a slop bucket, several gallons sized bucket, once a day, out your window. And if you cared to be nice to your neighbors or to passersby, you'd yell, "Look out below." And that gave people a chance to duck under the overhang. So that's what it's doing here. It's just a relic. It's just a throwback. Or you could say the overhang is a hangover from their early roots. The English colonists were just trying to make themselves feel familiar, because this was the wilderness, of course, at that time. There were acres and acres around here of open farmland. That's how this guy made his living. Just giving sermons as a minister, it didn't pay well enough to support a family. I think he had 8 kids. It's a museum now. It's open to the public as a museum. There are hundreds of these houses from the 1600s that are medieval style houses with the high peak gables and these massive brick chimneys that are the exact same style of brickwork you would have seen for hundreds of years in Holland or England or France. Okay, so there's our American medieval roots. You could say that. All right, this is the first must know. So this is the Moses Well. Just 2 words, Moses Well, of course. You know how to spell that. Sluter, the artist's name, the sculptor, is Sluter, Sluter, 1405. So what do we see here? We see it is a kind of a well, but actually it almost looks more like, and it is, a piece of religious sculpture that is meant to inspire religious fervor, right, or passion. That's what I was saying earlier about the late Middle Ages. Remember with the slide, hopefully you've seen that lecture. If you missed it, you should have seen it. It's posted now for a week on YouTube. What I said about the flamboyant style, that style of French Gothic, late Gothic architecture during the same period I was just saying. This is also a piece of sculpture done during the period of plagues and wars and famines and great suffering among the majority of the population, the vast majority. 99.9% probably had to live, barely hand to mouth. So they turned to religion, many of them, and it shows in their artwork. So for instance, these are figures. Now here's the illustration, right? Literal meaning for this, from the early scenes in the Bible, or just say early religious figures from the Bible. That's Moses. That's why it's called the Moses well. The guy here with the 10 Commandments, those tablets, right? He's holding. And then we're going to say, why does he have horns in a minute? But let's first mention what else is going on here. This is one of the early kings of Israel, probably King David, who's mentioned in the Bible. And then there are other early figures from the Bible on the other sides of this. And so what it really is a piece of sculpture above an underground spring. Well, springs are underground, aren't they, usually? So just you can say a spring, which supposedly had holy water. That's the bottom line of why this place was even created, why these sculptures were put here, and why there is, as you may be able to see here, some structure around it so people can come. I'm sure that was added later. That's not 600 years old, I doubt it. Looking at those panes of glass, it's definitely not that old. But there would have been some kind of structure for people from all over Europe to come and pray. Because why? The purpose of these kinds of holy water springs, or springs that supposedly had holy water, supposedly was, well, in essence, magic. The people who came thought that if they either drank that water or bathed in it, they would cure whatever was wrong with them, whatever ailments they had, magically or through the power of God, quote unquote. So that's what this was. It was a site for pilgrims from all over Europe to come to immerse themselves in or drink, or both, the holy water. And so it's actually the well above the spring with these sculptures. These are life-size figures. And then we have here angels above them, obviously supposed to be up in heaven looking down. So now let's go up close, and you're going to see something odd here. I think you can tell this version of Moses, it shows him as a blind man, and that's part of the meaning. Supposedly, according to the Bible, I'll try to keep this very simple. Moses led the Jews out of Israel, right? That's the story. You may already know it. If you don't, write that down then, because that's part of why he's here on this fountain, or this well. Supposedly, he's the one who found Israel, right? Found that space, which is now where the country of Israel is, for the Jewish people to make their homeland. After 40 years of wandering in the desert, and then God struck him blind, supposedly, right after he found the Holy Land. So he wasn't able to even see it. Or was it right before? I can't remember. Anyway, just say by the end of his quest, his wanderings with these, I don't know, thousands of Jewish former slaves following him around the desert for 40 years, he found a place they could all settle, but he was blind by that time. So that's why he's shown, you can see his eyes here or not. Obviously, he's not looking at anything. But then what is the explanation for horns? Why would Moses be shown with horns? Well, there's a simple explanation for it, and it's almost ironic, if not comical, unintended humor, I guess. It's a simple mistake of translation. The early Bible was written not in Latin, of course. There was no Pope. There was no, Catholic Church right after Jesus died. It was written in Hebrew and Greek and a couple other languages, just say Middle Eastern languages, or Eastern Mediterranean languages, just say ancient languages. And then Latin is a language of the Catholic Church. So when the Catholic Church had people translate the Bible, the different parts of it, into Latin, somebody made a mistake, because the original version of the Bible describes Moses as having horns of light, which they meant rays permanently protruding of light. That's strange enough, coming out of his forehead 24/7. I mean, that's a little odd right there. But that then got mistranslated as horns. I guess they just drop the last part of the phrase, horns of light. So he was shown, that is, the bottom line is Moses was shown incorrectly for over 1,000 years by artists, including Michelangelo even did a sculpture of him in a church in Rome as having horns. The horns are demonic. They're supposed to be symbolic of the devil. Why would a holy man like Moses have in common with the devil? But that's how they got this mistaken image of him. Of course, it does beg the question, how must it have been to travel with Moses during those 40 years in the desert? And where would you sleep at night? Of course, in a tent. So if you were in his tent, can you imagine trying to get to sleep? And you'd say, hey, someone turn out the lights. Oh, no, forget. It's just Moses. No, can't do anything about it. It's one of the more odd details that are in the Bible. But then it got even stranger when it was mistranslated. Okay, that's most of the meaning. But the last part of the meaning is the style. And that's the part I would like you, if it's on, I'm not saying it will be on the study list, then you should certainly know what style this is as part of the meaning. So take a look at your list of terms to know, right? We've been doing that each week. You should have that out next to the your laptop. And we will now give you the last new definition for this semester. International style. This is an example of the international style. Just like it sounds, it's spelled for you at the bottom. I'm not going to spell it again. Okay, here we go. It's a bit of a long definition, but not terribly long. 2 lines, I think. The international style was a style of late medieval art in Europe, comma, a style of late medieval art in Europe, comma, which had 3 characteristics. Number 1, the use of gold backgrounds and details. You just say a use of gold, such as golden backgrounds, or just gold backgrounds and gold details. This has both. I'll explain that in a minute. So a use of gold, including gold backgrounds and gold details. Okay, number 2, a depiction of various holy figures. I should say Christian, just to be clear. I'll say it again. A depiction of various holy Christian figures, usually from the Bible, of course. That's what these people are. We already mentioned that's, one of the early kings, probably King David, that we know that's Moses. So again, number 2 is a depiction of various holy Christian figures, usually from the Bible. And then number 3 is an unrealistic depiction of space in paintings. You got to say it that way because clearly that wouldn't fit this. This piece is not a painting, and we'll see several paintings with that 3rd feature in the next few slides. It's a piece of sculpture, so of course these figures have realistic space because by definition, sculpture, of course, is always 3-dimensional. Well, not always. If it's freestanding, and these are freestanding, of course, life-size human figures. So again, the 3rd feature is for paintings. It applies only that. An unrealistic depiction of depth. You'll see what I mean in the next slide. All right, so that's the whole meaning, except that I should point out where we see these features. Well, look at the wings of the angels. They've got gold. This is 600-year-old gold painted. There is such a thing. It's very expensive. You can buy gold paint. And I'm not talking about the gold color stuff you can use for models and kits at home. I'm talking about the actual gilt. It's called GILT. Some of you know about this. And the people use on grave markers in public buildings, maybe courthouses or whatever. So whenever you want gold to stay, not just a thin veneer, but actually layers of gold in, applied in paint, it's called gilt. So these are gilt, or just you could say gold colored details. And that's the background behind them. And that's gold, as is that. It's faded a bit more on the lower rim, but the upper rim, that gold is still in pretty good shape for 600 years. And then there's the gold color here, which is probably from just paint fading, a thinner layer, on the robes of both the 2 figures we can see here, and even the beard of Moses and this early king of Israel. We'll say King David. It's almost certainly King David. And then there's some blue, which is alternating. So we'll do the formal analysis in a minute. Of course, that's not warm. So the warm gold colors are found on, several details, mostly the robes of the figures, and then and the wings of the angels, and then on the background behind them. In fact, this has got gold. See, if you look closely, you can see it right there on this column. Okay. And then these, obviously, I already said they're religious figures. So the realistic depiction of space is only due to the fact that this is a piece of sculpture. So of course it's going to have real depth. All right, so let's do the formal elements. Well, the warm colors I just defined for you. So this should be obvious. They're on the robes and the wings of the angels in the background. And the cool colors are the blue on his, it looks like a sash there, right? Or undergarment, and on the tablets of the Ten Commandments, as well as this. Actually, that is this king's undergarment. So he's got some robe underneath his outer robe, and that's blue. And then on the background, some parts of the well itself are silver colored, of course, or gray. You could just say gray. Don't know if it's actual silver or where they are gold. So you could just say much of the background also has a cool gray color. Then we have for space, we'll do that now because these are real life size, three-dimensional figures in real space, but there is overlapping of course, the robes over their bodies and his giant beard. In fact, I had a couple students over the last few years say, he looks familiar, and one finally said, I know, he looks like the Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz, the actor who played that role. Just an odd way of looking at, Moses supposedly had a long beard, but this artist wanted to make it extra emphasized because he's got him with the double beard here. And of course, that has carved line on it. So that is how the simian texture is created. It's excellent simian texture on the facial features, of course, on the robes, on the angel's wings, and then there's visual line on the background of the walls of the well itself. They are stable. The human figures standing upright. Well, this guy's leaning over a little, so you could say the two closest to us are stable, and obviously the well itself is. And, these are flat surfaces, right angles, right? But the angels have dynamic details on their wings. This is the most, what is going on with that angel's expression? Doesn't look happy. And then, of course, the tops of their heads, of course, all human heads have curved lines and therefore somewhat dynamic. But mostly this is a stable work of art. It's balanced. Each, you draw a line down the middle of each side of the well, and both the background and the human figures will be balanced left to right and top to bottom. The rhythm is obvious. Moses has extra powerful rhythm with that wide double beard there, but the robes create rhythm, of course, from the folds, and of course the heads and arms and hands create rhythm. And let's see now. Modeling is just the shadows coming in from the sun. Okay, I think that's everything on this one. Let's move on. Okay, I'm going to do this in the order that it's on the syllabus. Okay, for some reason, when the slide librarian a couple of years ago transferred my slides to digital, they didn't always get done in exact order. So this one, the next one is Virgin, next must know now, so you need to take notes. Virgin and Child from Siena Cathedral. Virgin and Child, of course, those words are easy to spell. From Siena is S, capital S, of course. It's a city in Italy. Sienna. Virgin and Child from Siena Cathedral. And the artist's last name, sorry about it, being a long Italian last name, Buonasegna. That's how I've heard it, my Italian friends pronouncing it. You don't have to worry about pronunciation in this class, obviously. Buonnisegna. Again, Buonnisegna. Buonasegna, 1311. This is an international style painting, and it has all three of the features I just gave you with that definition you now have in your notes. The gold just jumps out at you. I mean, look, it's everywhere. It's behind the head of Mary. Of course, Virgin, we're talking about Mary, mother of Jesus. And there's her baby on her lap. And then these are the holy figures. Angels, which don't have any particular identity. But down here, we've got saints from the Bible, even one of whom is John the Baptist. It's the only one I clearly recognize because he's described as having long hair, a beard, and an animal skin coat in every description of him in the Bible. So there he is, looking up at the throne. This is called the throne of Mary, or the throne in the throne room, of heaven, and she's sitting on her throne. Supposedly, they sit around all day and just admire her. I guess that's what happens, supposedly. And then here's the Pope. Probably the current Pope, the one that was, in power or on his throne. There is a throne the Pope has, right? You could say, or in Rome, at the time, who was reigning as Pope. But it could be an earlier one. It could be. Because he's got a halo, and popes don't usually get called saints until after they die, if then. Pope John Paul was supposedly made into a saint. Not supposedly, I meant he was years after he died. So I think this is an earlier pope, someone maybe even one of the first it would be, early Christian history. And then these are the Jewish prophets in the background here looking down on everybody. So you could just say early holy figures from the Bible. So all of these are holy figures, and many are from the Bible. And then we have the gold color everywhere. The third feature is the unrealistic depiction of depth. Oh boy, does that come out here. Look how far back. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows behind this front row of people where the Pope is. And yet their heads and bodies are this. There's no diminishing size here, except some people would see these figures as some sort of limited use of diminishing size. So you could say there is a very limited use in this painting of diminishing size, but that's it. There is no other technique for depth. There's no atmospheric perspective. Of course, he didn't know scientific perspective yet, but I'm going to prove to you that some artists knew how to approximate it. The last must-know slide tonight will be the most important one. It's a high possibility of being on the exam. I'll remind you when we get to it at the end of this section before we review for the test. But this one doesn't have any techniques for realism except overlapping. Uh-oh. Hang on, there does that. Internet connection, come on. Okay. I hope that means it's back to normal. Yeah, last night about 3 or 4 people got booted out of the 14 or 15 that were listening. It happened to, one person said it happened to her twice. So let's hope it doesn't. I keep my fingers crossed, knock on wood. Okay, looks like my connection's good. I hope yours is too. All right, let's resume this final point about the definition of the international style. The only technique for most international style paintings is overlapping. You could say there's not even foreshortening here. That's not foreshortening. That's just, it's like totally, look how it's out of alignment. If it was foreshortening, it would show a realistic diminishing of the size of it as it fades into the background or further behind us as the viewer. That's not a technique of actual realistic depiction of space. So there's only maybe a very limited use of diminishing size, perhaps at the very top row. Other than that, it's just overlapping. Okay, and then we have the fact that the skin tones, this is part of the meaning now, look like dead flesh. I've had people say, don't they look like dead bodies? Yes, they do. They have this sickly, deadly looking greenish gray tint. Why? There's 2 theories. This is part of the meaning. One is that the original paints used by these artists, there was no oil painting. Oil painting didn't exist, of course, until the Renaissance, as you might know. But if you don't, you want to maybe write that now as part of the point I'm making here about why is their skin tone so unlifelike and so look so much like dead flesh. One of 2 explanations. Either the original paints had chemical composition that they couldn't have depicted or reproduced. There we go. They weren't able to reproduce lifelike skin tones. We're talking about European, of course, obviously. Should be much warmer tones than this, of course. So that's one theory, that the paints themselves had impurities in them. I think that's the way they usually say it in some art history texts. And that the original painting might have looked this way, even though the artist wasn't trying to do that. More likely, I think, is the second theory, that they just, the colors in chemicals in the paint deteriorated over time. This painting is, 700 years old. So, of course, that makes sense to me. We don't know what they look like originally. Obviously, we don't have color photos from the 1300s. So all we can say is one of those 2, or maybe a combination of those 2 theories, led to unlifelike or even dead-looking skin tones. On most, not all, but like 98%, the vast majority of international style paintings, until the invention of oil painting, when you could control the color composition of your paint. And that's after 1400. Okay, and the last thing about the meaning, and we'll do a formal analysis, is the blue robes. That's an important detail. All portraits of Mary after she gave birth to Jesus. It's an absolute. You would never see an exception. Show her in blue robes because blue is the color of royalty in European history and European art. So she's, excuse me, called the Queen of Heaven. There she is on her throne up in heaven, being admired by all these holy figures. And of course, with her baby Jesus, I guess when he went back up to heaven, his soul, he reverted back to his early childhood. So what we have here is a royal person. The Queen of Heaven is the nickname given to Mary. And always she's shown with blue robes. That's an important detail. Her outer robes are obviously her inner garments here, or under robe, or that's red, but mostly it shows blue for her being the Queen of Heaven. All right, plenty on the meaning. Formal analysis. This is definitely, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back to the full view. Balance, boy, is it? It's exactly equal number of figures, both, in the background and on either side of the throne, and in the front row too. So it's completely balanced, totally left to right. I would make the case it's balanced top to bottom, depending on where you draw the line. If you drew it here, then, these figures and the heads of these roughly balanced, right? I think it is both ways. All right, then you have the rhythm. Obviously, whoa, sorry about that. That jumped. We have the rhythm of the halos behind the holy people's heads, and of course their robes and the two arms of the throne, and of course the arms and heads. We said heads, arms, hands. I mean, and body parts of all these saints and holy figures and angels as well. Lots of rhythm. It's mostly stable. Look closely, because the only things dynamic are, well, the halos themselves, of course, and the tops of the heads, obviously, of all the figures. I would even see the throne is mostly stable. And the figures are almost all standing upright, so it's mostly stable. The largest mass, you could say it's the throne, I guess, but the throne kind of fades out behind her, but you could say that. The largest figure is clearly her, as it's supposed to be. She's the focus of the painting. And then after that, it would be the front row of people, including this Pope here. And then Jesus could be the fourth largest mass. The simile texture, that they did know how to do well in this period. It's excellent on the hair, the clothing. Even if the colors are off on the skin, there is realistic texture. And the modeling is also sharp and realistic on their faces and their robes. The lines are all thin outline. And then I already mentioned the technique for space is really just overlapping, except for just the limited use of diminishing size on the top row. It looks like a balcony there, looking down into a throne room from above those figures. Okay, now we're going to see something a little bit better and different. And the artist was much more talented. This is the next must know. And luckily, both the title and the artist's last name are much shorter. Virgin and Child Enthroned. I'll spell the last word. Enthroned. Virgin and Child Enthroned. Cimabue is the artist's name. That's how you pronounce it in at least I heard it pronounced that way in Italy. Cimabue, 1280. Well, do the math. It's 30 years earlier. So it's an early international style painting, because the international style was popular from about 1250 during the, just say 1200s to the early 1500s, for about 300 years. Yeah, actually 1250 to about 1550. So that's exactly 3 centuries. So this is early international style painting. It's got the gold background and, gold all over the rest of the painting too, on the halos. Right, and I would call this gold here on the throne. And then we have the religious figures, of course. This is Mary, once again, with her baby. In this case, much more lifelike, or I would call realistic looking. I mean, she has emotion here. She has motherly tenderness and affection in her facial features and her gestures, even with her hand pointing to him. And he looks like a real toddler, not a baby, really, but what about a 3-year-old maybe? Actually, instead of a 30-year-old miniature man with a bad haircut, so many of these holy paintings did depict Jesus unrealistically. as a young child or baby. Here, it's much more lifelike and realistic. And here, the skin tones are not quite so bad. So this artist must have figured out some way to preserve the original colors that he used, which would to me be an indication that there were chemicals in the paints that if they weren't treated or preserved correctly, the actual paintings I'm talking about, then they would discolor over time. That's probably the evidence to show that that's how the green colors came up in those other paintings, like that last one. Okay, so what we have is a little bit more realistic detail, depiction. I meant to say depiction of her emotions in her face, and even on his, and her gestures, more lifelike. That proves that Cimabue was and he was one of the best international style painters. Certainly the best during his era in Italy. He was the best Italian international style painter in the 1200s. You could say that were just his era, because of these things that we're talking about here. Now, the unrealistic depiction of depth, though, he couldn't overcome that. You're going to see the last slide, an amazingly advanced version of this style by probably the greatest painter in all of Europe before the Renaissance. But we'll get to him at the end tonight in about 2 more slides. Okay, so we see some, basic elements that we saw in the earlier one. We'll get to the formal composition, of course, in just a couple minutes. But to finish up about the meaning, she's wearing blue, so I already covered that. But, remember, if this were to be on the slide essay part, you'd want to mention that her blue robe symbolized her being the queen of heaven or royalty, because it's a color of royalty. And then, of course, the angels with halos symbolize them being holy figures. She and Jesus are figures in the Bible. They're just generic angels. And then down here, more figures in the Bible. These are Jewish prophets. You could just say early biblical figures, but they would be from the Jewish period of the Bible, as the Old Testament, as many of you know. So they're down below. And the last one, we saw the same kinds of figures from the early Bible up above looking down. So it's typical of the themes and the use of gold color and the lack of a realistic depth. Now here, there might be some hint of foreshortening, maybe just around the bottom of this column here, but then there isn't really, it's not obvious on the rest of the painting. And certainly there's no no diminishing size here. This angel's head is and shoulders are just as big as this one, 4 or 5 rows below. And there's obviously no other techniques such as atmospheric perspective or a scientific perspective. So it's really only overlapping and a very maybe minimal, I would almost call it a hint of foreshortening at the bottom of her throne. That's it. So again, this fits that definition of the international style. Okay, so now we can do the formal elements. Again, the rhythm is obvious with all the repeated shapes of the heads and halos, arms and hands. And then we have similar texture. That is always good in these paintings, or early or late international style, on the robes and the hair, and even on the skin and the faces of these figures. And that would be done with, of course, painted lines, right? And then we have the warm, of course, totally warm background with the gold and the gold halos. But she's a cool color, and Jesus has got brown and red on his robe, so he's a warm color. And then we have the clothing, or robes, I guess you should call them, mostly cool colors, as are the wings of the angels. Uh-oh. Hang on. Yeah, I got disconnected. Hang on, folks. Don't want to have it come to a screeching halt. There we go. All right. And then wrap this up, and then we've got just 2 more slides. And I think you'll find them more interesting. I'm going to confess something. There's a museum, some of you, the Young Museum, not the Young, the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. Can't go there now. Briefly, some people did go when they were open, the 2 big museums in San Francisco. You were lucky if you did. I'm envious of you, because I was supposed to go with a friend to go see the Frida Kahlo exhibit on December 13th. Oops, nope, can't do it. Who knows when that'll open again. So if you have been to the Legion of Honor, and if you had the time, besides just looking at the paintings, which most people go to see that, or the special exhibits, go through the history rooms, they call them, and they have reconstructed rooms from different periods as far back as Gothic era. And then they have paintings on the walls from the early international style. And when I walk through those rooms, I don't usually stop and linger much. I just keep going because all those paintings look alike to me. Now, it's a terrible thing to admit as an art history professor, I know, but it is not my favorite style. It's pretty monotonous, but at least in this one, we have to acknowledge, is a superior example of the skill of the artist in the colors of the skin being less deathly or more like life colors, as well as the emotions and at least some sense of, feeling in the figures. They're not just a wooden, dummy-like, statue-like features or creatures. Okay, so I think I didn't do modeling, already mentioned, right? It's pretty realistic on the faces here and on the robes. And let's see, what are we forgetting here? Oh, balance. Yes, it is balanced. It's very clearly balanced left to right and top to bottom. And then, of course, it's mostly stable. Most of these paintings are, except for the heads and halos, pretty much. Oh, and the very bottom of the throne. Yeah, that's true, these arches. But it's more stable than dynamic. And the largest mass, that's easy. It's Mary. And then I guess the throne, because you only see the bottom part of it. And then it would be it's a close call. I would think probably Jesus is the third largest. And then the front row of angels. Okay. Now, this is an odd painting, and one that I think you'll find a lot more things that you can identify with, perhaps. Anyway, it's also on the syllabus, so it's the second to the last slide that we're going to have notes on tonight. And it's called February from Book of Hours. February, the month, of course, from Book of Hours. And February, in case you haven't written it recently, is spelled February, from Book of Hours, as in plural. That means a calendar, is really what it means. A book with pages for each month illustrating that month. That's what they meant by Book of Hours. Now, I've told you guys during the review for the midterm, and I'll say it again for the final, you don't have to worry about prepositions, of, and, in, at. If you wrote book, February of Book of Hours, or February in Book of Hours, or February from Book with Hours, any of that, right? Prepositions I don't take points off, or if they're not exactly the same as they are in the syllabus, for what that's worth, might be helpful for some of you. Of course, it's all open book anyway, so you shouldn't have trouble looking up the exact titles. And the artist's name are two brothers, Limburg Brothers, Limbourg, Limburg Brothers, 1416. This is an international style painting, and you'd be right if you stopped and said, wait a minute, I don't see any holy figures, religious or otherwise, from the Bible, religious figures or holy figures from the Bible or anywhere else. You'd be right, except that there is just one little thing that marks this as a different type of figure, not Christian. This is Apollo. Supposedly, Apollo, the ancient Greek god, is the one that brought the sunrise every morning, if you know your Greek mythology. So this is the month of February, and this is the symbol for February Aquarius, right? See, he's pouring out a jug of water. And these are the days of the month. And you see the word February there. So it's a calendar is what it is. A very fancy, very expensive calendar. It's worth tens of millions of dollars. I saw it was appraised at some point. It's in France in a museum. But if it were to ever sell, it's each page alone, if they were to desecrate this thing, it's all bound together in leather. It's huge, it's bigger and heavier than most books you'd ever see in a library. And each page was painted by these two brothers for a nobleman who owned a large estate. So what is the scene depicting? So in other words, the religious figures come from earlier religions, but that is part of, what makes it. And we'll talk about the other features. Well, there's your gold. Let me go back up there. You see that's gold, and all of the borders between the lettering is gold, as well as some of the clouds here. So there's gold here. And that's the background. So that fits that part of the definition. It's definitely an international style painting. And then we have the unrealistic depiction of depth. We're going to get to that in a minute or two. It's laughably bad. But let's first talk about what's going on in the scene. It's a farm, or farmyard or barnyard, you'd say it either way, on the estate of a noble or a, powerful lord. That's what they would have called them then. And these are peasants who were slaves. I mean, there's really no other way to describe their lifestyle. They had no freedom. They could never leave their estates. At least they weren't supposed to. They could run away, but legally they were bound to the land and to their master. Well, that's pretty much the definition of slavery. And so these people were, just, working their whole lives for someone else. And all they got in exchange was, a sort of a crude housing and food, of course. So they had to work. But here they're taking a break. These three ladies, it's winter, February, obviously, so it's a winter landscape. And they're inside a barn. And they are warming themselves by a fire. And then this woman's coming to join them. And I know this is going to sound strange, but maybe a few of you have heard of the phrase go-go boots from the 1960s music TV shows like the American Bandstand and other shows where people danced in cages. It was ridiculous. Anyway, that was a big thing in the 60s. She's wearing that same kind of leather half boot. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how they got into a medieval paint. Now, these women are wearing, of course, these would be some kind of thick sock like wool or something to keep their feet warm. That's perfectly logical. Anyway, for some reason, this modern looking footwear is on another woman who has clearly done some work out in the yard and is coming across the snow covered ground to get into the warm barn here. And then we have the sheep in a sheep pen. And we have these, now I assume this is being February, they're dormant beehives, right? And we have a kiln. These are all the details. You could identify just the ones you want to, if this is on the final. I'm not saying it will be. And of course, kilns, we know they make pottery. And then we have the figures in the background. Well, let's go up close to this. Yeah, there we go. Here we have a woodsman, chopping. Supposedly he's chopping down trees to help build, barns or houses or fences. He's as tall or taller even than the trees around him. That's one example, in other words, of how the depiction of depth here is just totally unrealistic. But my favorite one is this guy here. Take a look at this, farmer here leading a donkey to the market, probably to go buy something to bring back for the, workers. And if you do the math and you follow along here to the village, when he gets to the town, he's going to be taller than that church steeple. It'd be like Godzilla walking into the town. It's ridiculously off kilter here. The depiction of depth and diminishing size is not used. There's obviously no scientific perspective. I don't call this atmospheric perspective. I had a student ask me that, not last night, but in an earlier semester. Well, doesn't that qualify? No, it's just the clouds in a winter landscape, because they're showing this kind of an overcast day. If there were objects with a blue hazy look over their surfaces, over the entire background, or a whole big chunk of like the mountain, like of these hills, then yes, you'd say, oh, well, this artist knew how to use atmospheric perspective. But no, it's not present here. And there obviously is not a vanishing point. There's no scientific perspective here where everything, or you wouldn't see these two guys being giants here against the landscape that they're supposed to be a part of. Instead of they dominate it. So again, the only technique for space here is overlapping with a little bit of, now here there is a little bit of foreshortening. You'd have to say this artist knew more about that, at least, on the roof of the sheep pen. And you could make the case on the top of the barn here, the peak of the barn gable there. Maybe this fence. Yeah, so there is a little bit of foreshortening, but that's it. The other techniques are lacking for a realistic depiction of depth. And you've got your gold background up at the top, as I mentioned, and the one holy figure, even if he's an ancient Greek holy figure, is present there. Okay, and then we have the last fact about the meaning is that this is the first winter landscape in European painting since the late Roman times. That should surprise people. It did me when I first started teaching at the JC. I couldn't believe that was correct. I started looking it up and I couldn't find another winter landscape in any art history source, online or in text or anything, because or museum websites. It just seems like they didn't paint winter landscapes in the Middle Ages until this one. The Romans did, because it does snow. Some of you know this in Italy. It can get quite cold in the winter, at least northern Italy. So there were winter landscapes painted in Roman frescoes, but not after the fall of Rome for another 1,000 years. Okay, formal analysis, pretty straightforward here. We just mentioned what there is for space, so we should already have that. There's just a little bit of overlapping. I meant a little bit of foreshortening on the sheep pen and the fence, and maybe the edge of the roof of the barn. Everything else is just overlapping. And then we have the cool colors dominating: the blue sky, the white snow, the blue clothes on these three women, the gray colors on the fence and the sheep pen. But you would have to say the kiln has a kind of warm color. Obviously, the barn walls do, and the human skin tones. And then there is gold up here, but it's dominated by the blue and white, which of course are cool. And then we have the rhythm of the human bodies and the fence posts here, or slats, if you want to call them that. And then the sheep, the trees that this guy, the giant, is cutting down. Obviously plenty of rhythm here and then the lettering up above. It's mostly, well, I used to say mostly, let's just say it's a mixture of stable and dynamic. It's stable on this kiln and on the barn walls, and at least the posts supporting the sheep pen and these trees. But it's dynamic on the human figures. They're leaning at different angles, right? And there's the curve of this fence, right? So and then the whole top round section of the calendar. So there's a lot of dynamic detail. All the lines are thin here. There's no bold outline. The semi textures are superb on the clothing and the skin. And you see on this, looks like a wicker fence. That's what I see here. And that's a lot of details. And this was a very talented, the two brothers that painted this, skilled in terms of semi texture, right, on all the details. And the modeling, already mentioned, I think I did right, is mostly visible on the faces and to some degree on the roof of the barn here, I guess. And I would call it roughly balanced, but to me, the top of the barn, if you look at that, it's almost equal with the top of this kiln here. And the sheep pen is in the middle. But you could make the case that, since there's some empty space in the middle area here above the midline, you could say that it's unbalanced toward the bottom. But to me, this balances it out, right? The calendars section at the top. Okay, now we get to the most important slide. Remember, I always say if a slide is so important, I'm not going to cut it from the study list. It has a high possibility of being on the exam. That is for tonight, this slide. Okay, so take extra careful notes. There's a lot going on here, and once you understand what you're seeing, it should impress all of you, as it does me, with the advanced level of skill that the artist was displaying. He was 100 years of his time, ahead of his time, I meant to say. So let's do the title, and then, and of course, date. And then I'll explain all of the important facts about the meaning, which you remember. You don't have to remember all of this. If it's on the essay part of which has a high possibility of being on the final, you just have to give me 6 sentences, six separate facts about the meaning to get full credit. But I'll give you more than that because there's a lot to say about it as we finish up with our new slides for tonight. This is called, 2 words, The Lamentation, Lamentation. Lamentation. That means to lament or to mourn the passing, the death. In this case, we'll say who it is. It should be obvious. It's Jesus has just died in this painting. Okay, the artist's name is Giotto, is how the Italians would pronounce it. Giotto, or as my Indiana aunt, my late aunt, used to mispronounce it, Giotto. Giotto, Giotto, 1306. This is more than 100 years before the last slide we saw. Keep that in mind. That's why we say this, that we're going to hear me tell you next about the meaning, proves undeniably that this artist was a century ahead of his time. That's why Giotto, first fact you might want to write about the meaning, is considered to be the greatest painter of the Middle Ages. Most people would say period. The European paint, of course. I mean, there were people painting, of course, in China and India. A European, the greatest European painter of the Middle Ages, or before the Renaissance. I don't think there's really any room for debating on that, and we'll see why. But let's first say what's happening in the scene before we describe what's so advanced about his techniques. It's the death of Jesus. Jesus had just been taken off the cross. That's his dead body, of course. And there's his mother in her blue royal robes, right? Kissing him goodbye. It looks like literally at his head. And then the other Mary, she's almost always shown at Jesus' feet. The only female disciple was Mary Magdalene. I'm not going to spell that for you. You don't have to worry about how to spell it, or you could just say the other Mary, the only female disciple. And then the only clearly identified other disciple is Peter. Some people think this is Matthew, the second disciple, and they hung out a lot together, according to the Bible. They were the first two disciples. So maybe that's Matthew. We know this is Peter because he's always described in the Bible as, the oldest disciple with, gray hair and a beard. And then we just have various other mourners. If they have halos, they're saints or holy figures. So this woman here, I don't know who she is. She's probably a relative of Mary's. And then this would be one of the other disciples. And then this is somebody else who's obviously some holy figure. But other mourners, just generically, mourning people from the area around where he was killed, which would be, of course, Jerusalem, right? And where are they standing? Now we're going to start talking about the scene and what makes the techniques used by Giotto in this painting, or Giotto, so advanced. Well, first of all, look at the skin tones. They're lifelike, as in European, of course, skin tones. They don't have that green dead look to them. So he had figured out how to use, the most advanced there was no oil painting yet. That's another invention. By the way, this is a fresco. I should have probably started with that. So you do want to write that on the wall of a church in Siena, Italy. Tip for those of you who ever go to Italy and have more time than just to see Rome, Florence, and Venice. Oh, any one of those is worth the trip to Italy. And if you got a little more time, I'd make my next stop after those Siena. It's an incredibly beautiful town. It's intact medieval town on a hillside with no factories, wires, or freeways in sight. You think you're back in the Middle Ages. And it's not a small town. It's like a couple 100,000 people, about the size of Santa Rosa. Right in the dead center of Tuscany, the most beautiful part of Italy, Siena. So this, again, is a fresco painting on the wall of a church in Siena, Italy. You can just see northern Italy. All right, so what do we got besides the realistic skin tones? Look at their emotions. Look at their, intense expressions and their body language. This man here, literally, his arms are out behind him, and he's saying it can't be. And then we have the other mourners here, weeping and wailing, of course, lamenting. That's the name of the painting, of course. His death. He had just died or just been taken off the cross, right? So he might have been dead a few hours, perhaps. But my favorite thing about the depiction the artist is using of emotions are these angels. These are angels from heaven. They're not miniature half-size angels. They're just up in the sky. So we're going to get to his techniques for space and depth in a minute or a few minutes. But these are angels looking down on Jesus's dead body, weeping and wailing. I like to use this phrase, you don't have to, but something to this effect. They're turning somersaults of grief in the sky because they can't believe that this holy person has died here. And of course, he'll go up to heaven supposedly, and they'll see him up there. At least that's the way the Bible describes what happens next. But anyway, right now they're overcome with grief. You could say it that way. And their emotions are much more intense and lifelike or realistic than the emotional imagery of any earlier painter than this. But what is the most amazing thing of all is his depiction of space. Let's start with the fact that that's clearly an accurate depiction of foreshortening on that rock wall. And then we have diminishing size. Like I just said, the angels are farther away from us. They're up in the sky, so they're smaller, as are the heads of the mourners, the further away they get from us. And then we have the two things that mark this as, again, easily a century ahead of its time. Atmospheric perspective is used on the cliff. So this is above a canyon It's called the Valley of the Kings. No, that's not the right word. That's the one in Egypt. I said that last night. My students might get confused. It's actually, I think it is called, maybe it's the Canyon of the Kings. There is a similar phrase in Hebrew. This is in Israel, right? So it's a scene outside Jerusalem, outside the city walls of Jerusalem, near where Jesus was crucified, and where he will soon be entombed in, a stone tomb. Of course, what else would it be? These are rock walls. And so they are just on the edge of a canyon where all of the early kings of Israel were buried. So actually it is called, I was right, the Valley of the Kings. At least that's the phrase in English. And so this is a real place. It really exists. I've been there. I've seen it. And it's an amazingly accurate depiction of some place he could have never seen. He never left Italy. So how did he know how to depict this? Some people say it's called divine inspiration. He had a vision, whatever phrase you want to use. There are, at the time he painted it, or shortly after, let's say, when people started traveling, certainly within another 100 years during the Renaissance, to actually visit the Holy Land, i.e. Israel, and this place outside Jerusalem, they noticed it. Wait a minute, how did he know how to paint that scene the way it really looks now that we're here looking at it? No one knows. It's a mystery. But the most amazing thing of all, if you had to pick one thing that absolutely distinguishes him from any other medieval painter, is he looks like he used scientific perspective, but he couldn't have. It didn't exist. So how do you write that? You just say it this way. In this painting, all of the techniques for realistic depiction of space are used, including two which no one else during the Middle Ages besides him had used since ancient Roman times. And that is atmospheric perspective, and then a technique that not even the Romans knew. And it's called, remember, the definition of scientific perspective, right? It has a vanishing point. So how did he do it? All we can just summarize it. The last fact about the meaning now is that in this painting, Giotto, the artist, uses a freehand approximation of the technique of scientific perspective. It's remarkable. His imagination was just amazing. Obviously, he thought to himself, well, how can I make things look like they line up correctly with the horizon? He managed to achieve it without even knowing the technique. It was over 100 years later in Italy, when it was in Florence, when it was finally invented, which we cover when we get to Art 1.2 or other later art history classes. So he was ahead of his time in every single possible way a painter could be. It's an amazing achievement. Okay, and then we have the formal elements, and then we'll talk about how the test is going to be given. We'll do the reduction of the list of terms to know and of the slides. So you want to stick around for that, so you don't waste time studying things that won't be on the test. So let's wrap this up. Balanced? Yes, I would say so, although the figures are larger below, so yeah, I can see how most people would feel it's unbalanced toward the bottom, but left to right, it is definitely roughly balanced. With these rocks and these rocks, this group of mourners and this group, it's roughly balanced side to side. We have already, I mentioned the techniques for space, overlapping, foreshortening, diminishing size, atmospheric perspective, and just can say freehand, I don't know the way to say it, version or approximation of scientific perspective. And then we have the colors, mostly warm, certainly on the human skin tones in the foreground, and the halos, and this rock wall here, and at least most of the robes, the majority have reds, right? And then there are, this does look purple though. So the lighter colored robes, well, that's orange. So there are some, and of course the skin tones he's dead, so his skin is not looking warm. So obviously that's cool, as are the blue robes of Mary and these two mourners here, or off-white and blue on the backs of these two women. And so it's a mixture of warm and cool colors. And in the sky, the angels, their faces and their halos are warm, but the sky around them and the background, of course, all of the background is cool. Then there's a thin and bold outline. There's bold outline when you get up close to some of these figures, certainly on this man's head here. And I would argue on Jesus's body, there's bold outline there. That's an early use of bold outline in paintings. Michelangelo perfected that, but that was 200 years later. And then we see the thin outlines on most of the rest of the figures and on the rock wall behind them. The largest mass is that rock wall. And then I would say this is a single mass. the kneeling, and they're all female, you notice, mourners around Jesus's body. Or you could say the largest mass, you want to break it down individually into each human figure, is the rock wall, then Jesus, then these two, because he looks taller than these two standing disciples. I think that's, you only have to mention the first three, right? And then we have modeling is very strong in the cement textures everywhere. He was even better at that than the best, like even better than Cimabue was, who was painting just a little earlier than him. So he could have seen some of Cimabue's work, even maybe met him. But he outdid anyone else at that time in the realistic detailing of the hair, right, which is done with, of course, painted line, and the clothing, and the rock walls here, the close by one and the farther one across the canyon there. All right, and then we have stable or dynamic. Well, both. We've got plenty of stable figures upright, observers or mourners here, and I'd say Jesus' body is mostly stable, and at least this one mourner is mostly sitting upright, but the other mourners around his body and the rock wall and all of the angels are dynamic. So you can say it's mostly dynamic. And then, are we forgetting anything? Rhythm, space, texture, modeling, balance. I think we've got it all. Okay. Any questions about this or any other slide we did before we now sign off on the screen sharing? Okay. Anybody? All right. Now we're going to just take a little while. It should take us too long because we can do this faster than the class did last night, which is to reduce the list of slides that you need to study by at least 40%. I actually did more like 45, nearly half. The reason we can do that faster is because you can see I've already crossed out, whoops, I always forget which is which. It's like, Da Vinci wrote in reverse, and you could only read his writing in his notebooks in a mirror. You know that, right? That's really hard to do. Okay, so here we go. I've already counted the number. We are going to cut 20 slides from this study list, which will leave you with only, or actually it's 18, which will leave you with only 24. That's more than 40%. If you want to do the math, get your calculator out, but it is. We did this together in my Tuesday night class. So here we go. I'm going to do it week by week, follow along and cross out with your pens. Each slide I tell you is being removed from the study list. Then I'll repeat the whole list once at the end. Then we'll do the same for the terms, and that won't take very long at all. Reduce that also by at least 40%, and then we'll be done for those who want to take off, but I'll stick around afterwards as always to answer any other questions that you have. All right, so here we go. Let's start with week 10. All right, under week 10, we're going to cross off 4 slides. The head of Constantine, San Vitale from Ravenna, Sant Apollinaire, another church from Ravenna, and the last one, Icon of Virgin and Christ from Istanbul. Okay? Again, if you're not sure you're getting all of these, either holler right away or wait till the end when I will repeat this list one more time. Okay, moving on to week 11. 2. We're cutting 2 slides. Blue Mosque from Istanbul and Great Mosque in Isfahan, Iran. I know people can easily confuse things when they're 2 mosques that have similar sounding names. So I cut those 2, okay, from week 11. Moving on to week 13. Remember, week 12 was the election. We didn't have a lecture that week. So week 13 is at the top of the next page. Cut 3 more slides. Stag Staff from Sutton Hoo, cross page of Lindisfarne Gospel, and the doors of Bishop Bernewald at St. Michael's. That's 3 on week 13. Moving down to week 14, cut 2 more. Prophet Jeremiah from the Church of Saint Pierre and the nave of Saint Etienne Church in Cannes. Week 15, 3. I promise you to reduce the number of Gothic churches, so I definitely did that this time, more than I usually do. Week 15, cut the nave of Chartres Cathedral from France, the vaulted ceilings of Amiens Cathedral, and the prophets and ancestors of Christ. Okay. Moving on to week 16, going to cut at least one more cathedral, and I'll make it Salisbury Cathedral in England, because that one, the slide is black and white, so it isn't as clear and accurate as the other one, Reims Cathedral or Cologne. Okay, so that's, one more. Sorry, I meant to say two in week 16. The second one you should cross off is the Dormition of the Virgin at Straussburg Cathedral. Okay, and then tonight's list, I'm going to cut two, and you might, some of you have guessed, or no, you shouldn't be surprised. I already told you these paintings of Virgin and Child from the Middle Ages, they're a snooze. I'm sorry, I know that's terrible. If anyone's offended, I apologize, but they all look alike. So I'm cutting them both. Virgin and Child from Siena Cathedral and Virgin and Child Enthroned. They're so similar, it would be hard to tell them apart. I totally would concur with that. So that leaves us with 24 slides, out of which 8 will be on the exam. So let us go ahead and do the same with the list, but you shouldn't take off right after we finish. This won't take very long. The list of terms to know, and cutting that list down. Again, we've already done it, so I could just read them off to you. We did this last night with my Tuesday class. But remember that these would appear on the true false section. 5 of these. I might say, the things invented by Muslims included minarets and Gothic cathedrals or something like that. Well, that obviously would be false. They invented pointed arches, but that's not a cathedral, right? So here we go. Here's what we're going to cut. So follow me along as you go. Starting with the 3 features of Greek Orthodox churches. Leave that, okay? But start there. Everybody see that, where that is? And the pages aren't numbered, I'm sorry. But flip back to where you see that near the bottom of, I think it's page 3. 3 features of Greek Orthodox churches. We're not cutting that. That might appear on the true-false section of the final. The first one we're going to cut is on the next page, illuminated manuscripts. And then we're going to cut another one in the middle, staff. Okay, right? And then we're going to cut, because we cut that slide, remember, stag staff. And at the bottom, the word cupola, that won't appear on the exam. And then moving on to 2 more, this is 6 we're cutting all together. On the last page, the second to the and third to the last. Decorated style and perpendicular style. I realize those could be confusing, but we're going to leave flamboyant style, meaning that, if the slide of Reims Cathedral is on there, that's relevant to the meaning. Now, what about, this is just to get a clarification for your benefit, what about these list of things invented? I'm sorry, I forgot the G. If you go back to the page where it says things invented by Muslims, don't forget to write in there, and I'll show you how. Remember, I did this in class. I had forgotten to put pointed arches, but you don't have to know all of these. The most I might do is list 3 of them and say, remember we did this with things invented by Romans. I included domes, aqueducts, I think it was, and obelisks. Well, obviously that was false. Most of you got that because it was the Egyptians that invented obelisks. Okay, so that's how these might appear. So if there's a list, you don't have to remember the definition of all the items on that list, but those lists are might, at least 1, maybe 2, appear the way they did on this midterm as true-false questions. So the 3 main features of Romanesque churches, make sure you know at least, you should know the 3 main ones for each one. That'll be enough, because I'm not going to list more than 3. And then the same thing for the 5 main features of Gothic churches. You should know those anyway, because they could come up as part of the meaning, remember, of the style of a Gothic church or a Romanesque church. So you should study those lists. And in any case, you'll have this handout with you, of course. So there you've got it in front of you during the exam or after it. All right. So last things I'll say before we decide if you want to take off after I finish this, you may, but I will stick around, as I said, as always, to answer any questions anyone has that you have to get it, really urgently need an answer to right away. Otherwise, you can email me, of course, before the exam. The exam is going to start promptly at 7:15. Don't log in at 7:14. Try to be logged in by about 7:05 because you'll need a little lead time. I'm going to, give you, for one thing, I don't know about you, but I like to do deep breathing or whatever it is before a test, or go get a cup of coffee, whatever helps you to concentrate. And then, of course, it's a 1-hour exam. So you will have the slides on the screen for the same amount of time. The first 5 are slide identification, exactly the same format as the midterm. 5 slides that you identify just like they were on the syllabus, except for the date. You can round them if they aren't already rounded to a 0. I'll repeat that, you see, during the few minutes between logging in and when the first slide hits the screen. Okay, and then, of course, the same thing for the true false. 5 true false questions worth 2 points each, and you just determine if they're accurate or factual or not. And then last, the third part's again the same as the midterm. 3 slide essays where you identify them on the top line. All of this is written on the instructions, of course, as well as a full 6 sentences or more if you want to cover your bases, because you might make a mistake possibly. If you have the time, of course you will, because you do have the extra 48 hours. You might write 6 or 7 or even 8 sentences, but 6 is the minimum for the full credit. Each in a separate, please keep them separate, a separate paragraph, 1 each for each of the 3 slide essays, 1 on the formal analysis and 1 on the meaning, in complete sentences, not bullet form. Okay, and it's worth 100 points. And then we have, the option you'll have, of course, to go back and look at all this again when it's posted by 6 p.m. on Thursday for 48 hours. But you absolutely I'm going to have to stick to that, I was going to say religiously. We talk about religious art, strictly stick to that deadline. I cannot back myself and or those students who need their grades, in a timely manner. Obviously, I will have submitted them probably before Christmas Eve, but I'm going to need that week to calculate them and get the grades back from readers. By the way, I look at every single file that a reader sends back to me and double check. And a few of you notice I've added a couple points from what the reader gave you if I thought they might have been, usually they don't, but once in a while they might be a little more strict than I would be. So the same will apply to the test. But to do that, I don't just log in grades that someone sent me by email, one of my readers. I do check everything. I mean, that's how any conscientious teacher should do. So you got to give me that lead time. If you send me something on Sunday, sorry, I can't give you credit for it. I just don't have time to log it in or to analyze it or grade it, let alone log it in. So please make sure you're cut off for any extra credit as well as the actual file with your final, and I'll give you an email that will remind you of all this, including how to label it, is no later than 6 p.m. on Saturday. Okay. And then I know I'll see, I hope, all of you. And if you somehow miss it, you can watch it, of course, when it's on YouTube. At 7:03 or 05, about the time you've been logging in, a week from tonight, on the 16th of December. That'll be our last meeting. Okay. Any questions from anybody about anything I've said tonight or anything about extra credit options? I'm going to just give you those attachment, forward the attachment that has them described. That's called the course grading or grading and course policies handout that some of you still have. But as a courtesy, if people ask me about what are the extra credit options, I'm not going to write them out for each individual email over and over, because I know a lot of people will have forgotten. They're actually at the beginning of last week's lecture. That's now on YouTube too. I described them in even more detail. If you want to just play back the first 10 minutes or so of last week's lecture, which was the one on late Gothic or Gothic architecture continued, you can hear the details of how you can access extra credit or receive extra credit from each of the options in more detail. But the handout does adequately, I think, describe that. I think I've covered everything that I intended to tonight. Anybody have any questions at all about grading extra credit?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
My last paper wasn't graded. Should I just send it to you again?
Yes, please do. It could be that where did you send it through Outlook? because you know you need to send them. That causes some confusion sometimes.
I
But
sent it to the Mark W at AOL.
oh, okay. Well, then there'll be a record of that. I don't doubt you. There won't be a problem with it being considered late. Absolutely. I don't know why I should just say I don't know. Maybe it's possibly it could be an oversight, but I don't ignore that fact. When I look at everyone's, I would have noticed that I didn't see it entered as a grade next to your name and sent you an email. I may have already done that if you haven't checked your email since. Let's see. Did you? So you did your first paper and the midterm, but you did the second paper. You just hadn't gotten the grade. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I didn't get an email about the grade.
Okay. What's your name? Because I think I know the answer to why that happened. What's your name, please?
Garrett Mendeville.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know why. Because I didn't have your email stored. So the answer is really easy for you. Yeah. It won't. Yeah. Send the paper again, labeled. I think you already have it labeled in your file, right? As I guess it's resending or forwarding it to me at markw at AOL. And just add a line at the top that, as per our talk or your instructions on the last class meeting, I'm resending this, and I'll make sure I grade it right away tomorrow. If you send it tonight or tomorrow morning, I'm going to
Okay,
try to
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that way you'll know your total points heading into, and of course anyone else can ask me that at any time, because you can do the math yourself. But if you didn't, know for sure, did you do any extra credit? Not, I'm telling you now, there are people who will benefit. And I think I said at the beginning, so I'll keep it to just that one more time that I'm going to repeat this tonight, at least. There are people who are not going to get as high a grade as they could if they did the extra credit. And I know how busy and distracted we've all been, boy, this semester especially. But it's such, there's so many different options, so many different ways. And a couple of them are worth 15 points, and there are easy ways to get 10, or multiple choices for 5 points each. So if you're one of those people who by now you should know well, Mr. Mendeville, you will soon know what your first 3 grades are. You can do the math, or you can ask me to do it if you somehow just are too distracted. But you should be able to add up the points you've gotten once you've got all 3 grades and see, where am I? Oh, wait a minute. Whoops, here we go. There. Do I need X points? Or that's what I could do for you. Tell you how many more points you need to get an A or a B or whatever grade you're aiming for that you're below. Then you'll know how many extra credit points you need to do. But the easy solution is do all the extra credit, 50 points. It's not that hard. You have another 10 days between now and next Saturday, a week from Saturday, for all the extra credit options. And then you've got yourself a cushion or a margin for error. All right. Any other questions from anybody else about anything we covered tonight?
Are you gonna go over which slides we should study?
I just did, but I'll repeat. I understand why you're asking. Yeah. The ones we didn't cross out, those are the ones to study. There's 24 of them. Did you just join? No, if you joined us recently, I'd see your name down there as admit. Yeah, you were here, right? When we crossed off the 18 slides, that leaves the ones I didn't cross off as all the ones you need to study. What I was saying, I'll repeat it, is that leaves you 24 slides. It's not that many for a college level course, out of which a third will be on the exam, 8 actually, just like with the midterm. So I cut, as I promised, and I put it in writing at the top of the syllabus. Remember, and I've been repeating it for both the midterm and the final. I do this in all my classes. I cut by at least 40% the list of what's left, and what's left are the ones we didn't cross out. Is that clear? I mean,
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah, I just want to make sure. So that way everything we didn't you didn't write a line through, you do need to study. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Now's the time to ask. Well, of course, you could also email me, but if you wait till right before the test, you may not get an answer because I will be busy myself. Oh, yes, I'm going to send the test to you and email you and remind you of that at least 2 days before that. The test will arrive in your inbox by 5 p.m. on, I'm going to go ahead and do it for both classes on Tuesday. Even though the Tuesday class, that only gives them 2 hours to print it out. But I mean, you're going to be at your laptop. And you've all got printers. I know you do, right? I mean, who doesn't have a printer? If not, you will need to borrow one. If you want, you should print I mean, you pretty much have to print out if you're going to take the test in real time, just like the midterm. So there's nothing new here, right? But just again, as a reminder, it's 2 pages, and you can write right on it, or bring, have extra paper next to you with you. I always recommend 2 pens when you're taking a test in real time, in case one, runs out of ink or leaks. And then you could just write the answers right on there, but then you always have the time to go back. And I will send you the template, the blank test, right, of 2 pages. It'll be the same format, but obviously the difference will be the true false questions will come from the terms we covered just this half after the midterm. You'll get that by Tuesday. Okay, so print that out and have it with you, obviously, before 7 p.m. on Wednesday. Okay, that was the last detail I meant to say earlier, but I'll send you an email to remind you as well. Okay, again, anyone else with any questions about anything else that we covered tonight? All right, if you think of others, you can, of course, email me as long as you give me enough time to get back to you, at least 48 hours before the test. Okay, is it all right? Everybody ready to head on out? Okay. Good night, folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Take care and stay safe. I know Sonoma County didn't shut down, but I've been. I'll give you this quick. One of my readers, she works at a hearing clinic, and they're elderly, of course, most of them even older than me. Sad news is that 1 died and 4 are in intensive care in Sonoma County at Kaiser. Her mother works at Kaiser. So the fact that the county didn't close down, I was thinking, man, it's safe. I was going to take my daughter up there during the break to Jalisco's. If you haven't been to Jalisco's, the best carnitas in the.
I had Jalisco's for dinner tonight.
Yeah. It's open, but I would be cautious about how you do that. That's your choice. I'm just saying there are reasons why the other counties shut down. I thought they were overreacting. I really did at first. I have friends who own restaurants or work at restaurants here in the East Bay, and they're just upset. I don't blame them, but there are some reasons. It's a hard thing to balance, and who knows what the right balance is.
Well, I can say for myself, because I've been eating out, I haven't caught COVID. We've been
if you eat
out
outdoors,
since
it's safe. That's what I was telling my reader, because we were supposed to meet in Vallejo, which is in Solano County, and they're not shutting down outdoor dining. They have 35% capacity in their ICUs, but Sonoma County, it's rapidly diminishing, is what I'm saying. So be aware of that.
Yeah, well,
but dining outdoors
also
is
the
relatively
restaurants-
safe. It is, according to.
But I noticed that the restaurants started to get a little lax around the past couple months. They just got comfortable, and they weren't,
that's true too.
they're not changing their gloves and stuff. So you have to still watch.
That was the point I was really making. You said it better than I did. You put it better than I was, which I'm saying is just be aware of everything around you if you're going to go out anywhere, and you all know what to do. It's pretty
Well,
safe.
I'm sitting in Tahoe.
Oh,
I'm at my cabin in Tahoe, and I'm hibernating here. I have all the food and I'm doing my finals up here, so.
okay. Well,
Thank you.
I hope it's safe up there. But the point is, do everything you know needs to be done. Everyone must know by now what those measures are for you and your family to stay safe. Okay. All right.
Tahoe's enforcing a stay-at-home order on Friday.
Okay, so they're joining the group of counties. It won't be much.
Because it's going to snow, and they don't want anyone coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, anyways, use the wise precautions that we know that the scientific community has discussed. Didn't know at first. They weren't sure about masks, but now we know, yes, that's an important part of the safety measures that we all should follow. Okay, so good luck. Take care. Stay safe, and I'll see you all in a week. All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
You're welcome.